Welcome to Lamplight, a podcast with insightful messages and conversations by real people pursuing hope and change. In this talk, Chris Cooper explores the importance of acknowledging and remembering people who have been the face of Jesus for us. People who, because they were in our lives for a time, changed us. Chris shares about the creative force of the Trinity and the surprising beauty of darkness. As you listen, consider what benevolence means to you. Might there be more meaning and purpose to grace and goodness than we often assume? Let's join Chris to explore this together.
Okay, where you are for a second, would you just take a big couple deep breaths, stretch out any parts of your body that feel forgotten this morning to be as present as possible. If you have any groans in there, go ahead and just let them out. It's okay. Help yourself, mind, body, and spirit remember that here we are. And here God is. And it's good. And then I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for a second and just to think on one thought here this morning that I've been sitting with and I wanted to share with you today. And if you fall asleep, it's okay. You needed it. If not, you can open your eyes in a moment and we'll continue on. Continuing those deep breaths that go all the way through your body down to your toes. Yes, I am a counselor and a vocal coach and all these things that breath is important to me. And I think that dry bones, breath is important to God. When God breathes, something has to live. Today we sit in wonder for a moment and just think about this, if you would. If God is Trinity and Jesus is the face of God, then it is a benevolent universe. God is not someone to be afraid of, but is the ground of being and on our side. I'm going to share that one more moment and let you sit with it this morning as we stretch into a new day. If God is Trinity and Jesus is the face of God, then it is a benevolent universe. God is not someone to be afraid of, but is the ground of being and on our side. Okay, you can open your eyes if you're still here with us. And but I did want to kind of let that be the ground of what I want to say today. And what is interesting, I think really important for us as Christians, for people of faith, for people walking, is to know that sometimes we have to see with the eyes of Proverbs. We have to see with the eyes of Sophia Wisdom. We have to see beyond what seems to be apparent in the very material, very specific points of being in which we are existing at this moment. So sometimes it doesn't feel like a benevolent universe. It does not preclude the fact that we go through heartache and struggle and frustration. But if God is Trinity and Jesus is the face of God, then that's a grounding truth. That's the ground of being. Yes, we will walk through many things, many forms. And some of those I'm going to share with you this morning. But I would like to encourage you to do a little experiment and just experiment with the idea that perhaps even and despite and over and in and through all of those things, that God is on your side and our side. And that, when I think about that deeply, feels like just a welling up of something beautiful that will probably terminate in a shout of hallelujah. So I kind of wanted to talk about what this mystery of what we're doing here is, because it's kind of weird that you all gave up your lives and spent all this money and traveled all this distance to come into this place with people that you hardly ever see and live all day long with them doing all these weird things that we do at CFO. So I just want to acknowledge that, even if you've done it for a long time, and you're looking again with fresh eyes, or if this is the first time, it's kind of weird that you're here. And me too. And that's good, and that's often a place where I think God does meet us. And I think one of the things that's interesting about that is this idea of just shifting all the things that we're paying attention to. I've been participating in this thing called the Living School the last couple of years, which has been it's a formational spiritual school with a lot of teaching, a lot of depth, a lot of things that just kind of blow me over. And we have this thing that we call an alternative orthodoxy. And the whole idea is that it's symbiotic. It's parallel to all the things we've grown in and that we grow through and the other communities we have. It is not in competition. It is not in opposition to things. It's simply paying attention to different things. And I think that when I was thinking about coming here and sharing this week, that's one of the things that I think is one of the strengths of the format of CFO in the way that I've grown up in it. It is not, as maybe Pam said last night, it is not in opposition to, it's not in competition with anything that's going on in our churches, in our faith communities, in our workplaces, in our daily rhythms, and all of those things. It's simply coming together and we're agreeing for a week that we're going to pay attention to some different things. So maybe it's not an alternative orthodoxy here because we don't spend a whole lot of time drilling down into like specific ideas that we need to agree on, so much as the experience of like the overwhelming, transforming love of Christ. But it's an alternative orthopraxy, which means that none of you are doing the things you would be doing at home, the praxis, this morning, as if you were in the place where you always live. And so that is, in and of itself, I think, an opportunity for God to slip in through the cracks and to change something about the way we live that will change something about the way we be. And there's also something about the fact that it's situated in community. Being here with you all is different than if I came here by myself. And that's awesome. So now I get to jump in and I'm going to talk really fast about a whole bunch of things that are on my heart. Does that work? Sure. If I get too fast, you just tell me like slow down or say something. Give me one of those really subtle signs that you're giving me at the beginning. Okay, Beverly? Okay, good. All right. So I guess one of the things that I've been sitting with for a while that I also wanted to share this morning, I'll probably come back to a little bit, is back to that benevolent universe and if Jesus is the face of God. One of the things that has been overwhelming to me as I've sort of interpreted and reinterpreted and understood the way that life moves in and out and the way things happen is the centrality of the message that God is love. And it's really interesting. And then I've been studying incarnation and this concept of the law of three. I don't want to get too much into that too soon, so I'm going to try and give a soundbite and see if I can come back to it. But I do want to say the one thing that I think you have encountered if you're here already or for the 100th time is a lot of love. Sometimes uncomfortable love, weird love, hug lines when you walk in to eat. Anybody do that at home? Okay, I'm just acknowledging again, there's some weirdness to it, and that's okay, and that's partly where God meets us. But one of the things that I've been sort of thinking about, if God is love, if love is Trinity, if Jesus is the face of God, then the love is, if you will, the engine of change. And if that's true, then we're going to see a whole lot of change here this week because there's a lot of love. And so this idea that in the law of three, it's the idea of the Trinity. Sometimes we get so hooked on focusing on the persons of the Trinity and naming them and pinning them down, and this is what the Father does, and this is what the Son does, and this is what the Spirit does, that we miss like one of the big gifts that the Trinity gives us in the idea of interrelationality is not so much who are the persons involved, but how do they relate? What is the movement among the three? What is the perichoresis? What is the dancing about? What is the movement? And so it's the idea that, okay, let's see. My 30-second nugget on Cynthia Bourgeau's teaching of the law of three, which I've been trying to unravel for months on long walks. So forgive me if if I just totally lose everyone here, but it's this idea of one of the things that's beautifully represented in the Trinity as it's presented to us is that the law of three is the law of creation. That in order for anything to take and hold a new form, it seems to be that the minimal number of forces at work have to be three. So in a very, very simple way, let's just think about braiding your hair. Women, what happens if you do 2 strands? What happens? It falls apart, right? But what if you do 3? It can hold a new form, right? Okay, the guys are like, what? And all the women are like, obvious. And this is the part of community, is like there's so many things that are obvious to you that are not obvious to me because I'm a dumb 42-year-old man. Okay? So like that, but those are the things that we share. So yeah, that's a real specific example. And then another one might be if you're wanting to make a stool, 2 legs in a seat, will it work? No. Minimal amount of distinctive forces required to help that shape hold a new form is 3. 3 legs, you can make a stool. You can have more. If you want to have 16 legs around the stool, you could do that. But 3 is needed to help it create a new form. So it's this idea that somehow embedded in the Trinity is this idea, this relationality, that it's not just a group of 3, but there's 3 forces working, and out of that can come a creation, a new thing. I'm going to try and come back to that in a minute. But I'm going to do one more example. So blue, say you have paint. Blue, yellow, red. And you have those 3 things and they're sitting there. What new thing is made from that? Brown, okay. The trick of the question is nothing. We think that we begin to see things in groups of 3. We think nothing. We think that, put those. No, if you just have blue, red, and yellow, you just have blue, red, and yellow. It's a group of 3. What it takes to make something new is if you have red, yellow, and a paintbrush, then you can make what? Red, yellow. Let's try this again. I'll head next door to the K3. Red and yellow and a paintbrush, then you can make orange. Yeah, exactly. So it's not just simply a grouping of 3, but there's a force at work. And this is something that it's been sort of mysterious. We can identify it sometimes by the fruit. When we have orange, we can look to see the blue and the yellow and the paintbrush that are sitting beside it. But sometimes we don't know what's going to be made and what it is. And all this is part of this mystery. Does it sound a little out there right now? That's okay. I'm going to try and be more specific as I share part of my story now. Okay. But the idea holding that there's 3 and that one of those forces at least must be some kind of transformative love. And guess what? He has a name. Okay. So I guess to talk about the journey I've in, I have to at least take a couple minutes to reference how I got here. And a big part of that has been my lineage thus far. And a lot of that is you all. I want to talk just a bit about what it means to be a mystic. And I just have a curiosity, because that word is very ambiguous. When I say the word mystic, does it make anybody nervous? It's okay if you do. Yeah, okay. So BJ and I have had a little bit of a dialogue about this concept for a few years. And as I've studied a little bit about what it means to be a mystic and what it means to be a Christian, I think I've come to this idea. I'm like, I don't know how anyone can be a Christian without being a mystic on some level. Amen. Except that I know that maybe we can redefine things and cause them to be scary. But the whole idea of mysticism is really the idea that you can experience God and that God can somehow that God, the Spirit of Christ, can move beyond to actually speak to us personally and encounter us. At the basic level, that's what. Now, we can take anything in a super weird direction, right? We're great at being creative, and we can apply that to some weird things too. But at the basic level, I don't know. And I think we've had a pretty good experiment with this in the United States. Can we take Christianity and make it not about an encounter with God? Yeah, we can. We can make it about something else like an identity or a political grouping or a set of ideas that we check. But that's, I don't think, what the mind of Christ was. I don't think the example of Jesus was that at all. Was actually more along the lines of unity of mind, about actually connecting with God, about actually having God connect with us and responding to that. So just with that as a bit of a backdrop, I'm thinking about all the mystics in my life who, growing up, I didn't have that name for them, but there were people who modeled for me what it meant to actually to believe that God is present and willing and wanting to encounter me and maybe all around and change me and interact with me and cause me to also invite me to participate in that I am a participating agent in that interaction, in that connection, in the energy of Christ, the Spirit that's moving. And so I just want to name some of those people, some of whom are here and some of whom aren't, and just take a moment to remember. And I want to invite you this morning, as I do, to remember who have been people who have energized you to move to God and to recognize that God is moving in and all around you in your world. So just think and let some names come to mind, and I'm going to name some of the names who have meant a lot to me. Luella Sedevi, Joy and Lois Fairhead, Glenn Clark, Star Daly, George Washington Carver, Sarah Croce, Mary Young, Sharon Witt, Ashley Rapana, Danae Rapana. I haven't got to see Danae for a while. Bo Bottomley. I'm just going to leave some space because I can't name them all, but I know you are in your heart and mind too. Marcus Fairhead. My wife and my children. Yeah. And as I'm remembering and thinking about that, and I literally can go through and look at each one of you and name each one of you. Even right now, you're impacting. I am thinking that one of the things that I have incredibly and increasingly present with me is that wherever I go, like me standing here, I have all those people standing behind me. That they're a community. Even if I named you, that part of what the things that you gave me is living in me and it's passed forward. And this is like the beautiful thing that God does in community. And this is why I believe also that Christianity is made to be situated in community. That we're made to be here together and to stand together and do this thing. And so knowing that, remembering all these things, I want to come back to one of these things that I think is an inferior message, just in case there's anybody who has the shadow of this morning, this idea that we often somehow come to, and I think it's because we're humans, or maybe it's because we're Americans, or maybe it's because we're American humans, that like a primary motivator for us and probably for God is shame and guilt and these things. Now, God does move. But I think the primary agent I'm going to keep trying to make a claim for, that the primary engine of change is love. And the reason I can stand here with any kind of confidence is because I have the love of all those people I named and all of you that is standing with me everywhere I go in life. And that you are the benevolent face of God, the face of Jesus in this world. So it might sound like I'm being a little circular here, but I'm going to keep coming back to some of these things. I want to tell you a little bit about Paquita. I'm not out of time yet, am I, Cameron? Okay, good. If you are feeling a little tired or whatever, you can still stretch. You don't have to just stare at me like with blind eyes, okay? You can move, you can take a breath, you can even stand up and sit back down. If you stand up, I might ask you if there's something you want to share with the group, but you're certainly welcome to do that. I have no problem with that at all. I want to talk about Paquita a little bit. She's a woman who I've been thinking about lately, just remembering that several of us met in Peru. And when I think about Paquita, I was thinking about how do I frame this? How do you capture something, right? And I think one of the beauties of Scripture is that if we aren't getting too literal with it, we see big truth in these rich, deep stories and these things that are happening. And we're not trying to nail down how many steps did Jesus take from the tree to the other thing, but we're actually seeing what is the story trying to tell us. And one of the stories to me that encapsulates what I saw in Paquita's life over and over again is the story of Lazarus. Little finger waves if you know the story of Lazarus on some form or another. Okay, you've heard of it. Great. That was really just to see if you're awake. It doesn't matter if you know it or not. But the story of Lazarus, I'm going to give it in a very brief, very, small nutshell. And go read it. Read it 3 or 4 or 5 times. Read it from multiple different gospels, multiple different readings, and see what it speaks to you. But one of the things that I think is amazing about it is Jesus is doing this thing where he's going and he's sharing love and truth and grace, and he's on the road and he's moving people. And this messenger comes up and tells him that his dear friend is dead, and it's tragic. And so Jesus drops everything and runs to the grave. No? Shaking heads. Okay. What happens? And so Jesus, overwhelmed with this news of his friend's death, stays 2 more days. And then he makes his way there. And he does make his way there, and there's some indication from the text and from the story that he is heartbroken and he's grieving. But it's not because he is ever saying that his friend is dead. What does he say instead? What is his descriptor? He's asleep. Okay, he's asleep. So he goes to this place, and the good friend's sisters are just in deep grief, weeping. And so Jesus what does he ask them to do? He has compassion, he interacts with them, and then he gives like a task for the people to do. And what is the task that he tells them to do for this dead man? Open the tomb, right. And then we have what's that? Yes, there's 2 things, right? Back to back. The first is open the tomb. Should you do that for a dead person after a couple of days? I mean, he's asking something, right? Yes, I see this. Yeah, you're right. Ooh. And then the second thing he asks them to do, the ones who are standing around him, is to unbind him. How many of you are running to do that for a man who's been dead for a few days? Even if he's a good friend. Walk, okay, but not run, with a little hesitation maybe. Right. But Jesus, and then what happens is Jesus calls him forth. And it's interesting, I've thought about that story a lot of times. There's a piece for everyone. He is deeply moved with, not because he was concerned at all about Lazarus' in story, where he was going to be, if Lazarus was in hell or in heaven, or if Lazarus was dead or alive. He isn't concerned about all of that. The part that moved Jesus to compassion in that story was the grief that his friends and family felt. And I believe that's the heart of God, that God isn't a suffering God. He suffers with us, and this is like a gift. And we see that as Jesus himself goes to the cross and what that is. But then God also is a God who calls things to life. We see that also shortly after in the person of Jesus represented there. And this is something that I saw Paquita do lots of times. It's like she would see, sometimes I think a mystic is a person who sees beyond and sees that God is working here. Sees it's more than just like what it looks like. So examples, like we would take this bus ride out into the jungle to go to CFO camps in the jungle. And Paquita was like an 80-year-old woman, and she could walk farther than any of us. She had more energy than any of us. She was stronger than any of us. I mean, she could have carried Krista on her back for like a mile if she needed to, right? I'm not even kidding. And we would get to a place and she would disappear. And then she'd come back when we're getting ready. Well, this is on a return trip. We're getting ready to go back. We get to the bus station where we're getting ready to board a bus, and she would disappear for 20 minutes or something. And she'd come back just happy, and we're like, okay, Paquita, what have you been doing? What are you up to? And then would come like a little entourage of 5 young local men, and they would be carrying like like poles with like various fruit hanging from them, and probably five or seven different things I'd never heard of. And they'd be loading them onto the bus for her. And we're like, what is going on, Paquita? And she's like, oh, I went and made some friends. And they gave me these things from their farm. And here they are. And this is like copa, this is whatever. I don't even remember. Maracuya. This is that. She's naming all these things. It's only found in this region. It's really good for your liver, for your intestines, for all these sort of things. And while I was there, they all accepted Christ and became my friends and offered it to me and wanted to bring it to me on the bus. Okay. And what she meant is like she just loved them, and then they loved her back in a way that like changed their action and the direction of their day. And you're like, okay. And they gave her all these gifts and stuff. And we're like, amazing. And she'd take them back and whatever. I remember another specific time when we had just arrived and we had taken we were way out in the jungle. So we had taken like a 14-hour bus ride to get to one CFO camp in the jungle. And that was awesome. And then we took another 10-hour, there were no buses that went, this ride in these little taxis that you paid for, like a colectivo. So a group of people would pay a certain amount and you'd get in them. It was amazing through the jungles and stuff. The road was horrible, and that's why there were no buses. It was like sometimes it was dirt, sometimes it was rock, sometimes you were going like right over the top of the waterfall before the waterfall would go down. You're driving through the river, like all these ridiculous things. We end up in this place called Pucallpa in the middle of the jungle where the mosquitoes could suck your blood dry in like 20 minutes. I actually remember at this camp, I took a swath to send to a friend of like a 2 by 2 inch picture of my arm where we counted 47 bites on that little spot. It was like bite on top of a swelling of another bite on top of a swelling of another bite. It was like we slept in, like that is like sleeping in under like mosquito nets and everything, and wearing like 99% DEET is the highest that they sell. So you're like killing your skin and your body to like try and not be killed by the mosquitoes. So like this is the place where we are. It's pretty like out there for me, for us, the people in our group, and we had suitcases and stuff like gringos from America. So we get there out here and we had to wait in this park for this person who's supposed to come meet us that we'd never met before, who's going to take us further out to where the actual camp was, another 45 minutes from the city into the jungle. And we're sitting there in this park, and there's people, most of those people who have never seen foreigners, because it's not like Lima or Cusco, which is like all touristy. It's like they've never seen any Americans and people who look or act like us, and we're very much out there. And we've got this pile of stuff that basically just says, take it if you want it. If it looks interesting to you. Then there's a group of young men there who are kind of like making us all nervous. They were eyeing us and our stuff pretty intensely. And in comes Paquita, and she had gone somewhere and come back like she always did. And we're like, hey, there's this group of like young thugs over there that are kind of checking us out and our stuff out. And she's like, oh yeah. Yeah, it does look like they're pretty menacing, doesn't it? Yeah, and so we like blink, and then she's standing with them. And they're like all gathered around her. And then like we're watching, and before we can even like take a step, like they're like all on their knees, like in a circle around her and praying, and then up and hugging her and coming and hugging us, and then left. And I'm thinking about like all these things that Paquita does, and I'm thinking, this is like, it's always the Lazarus story. She's always seeing something that I'm not seeing there, something that's not alive. She's not concerned about that at all. There's a role for other people, and she's saying, come to life. Come out. Come forth. She could look at those young men and be like, oh, there's something that needs to live in them. She's not looking at them and seeing, oh, this is a problem. We need to address them. We need to threaten them away or these things. She's saying, there's something in them that wants to live. And I know what that is, and I'm going to share with them the spirit of love. And they felt loved with her. And just to give the tiniest of her backstory, this is a woman who was totally transformed by the love of God in a physical healing sort of a way. When she was a small child, her mom had decided, it was sort of, She grew up when there was a lot of terrorism in Peru. A lot when Peru was the cocaine capital of the world, which it is not and hasn't been since the late 90s. But at the time she grew up, it was that. There was a lot of military action. And her mom, just probably from her own experiences, whatever she had, knew it was not a safe place for a woman to be in the world. So when Paquita was born as a little girl, her mom determined that she would not be seen as a woman. So from the time that she was born until she was 13 or 14, no one in her life knew that she was a girl. Her mom dressed her as a boy, told her to act like a boy, all these things, which we can see probably was intended for preservation and love. But the effect on that had been that Paquita had felt that she was never seen or known for the first 13 or 14 years of her life, that everyone who looked at her saw her as something other than what she was. And so she had a lot, as a young woman, of bitterness and anger and resentment, and there was a lot of fight in her. And so as a young woman, and I did not know her, of course, at this time, but this is her telling her story to us and to others. She developed a cancer, terminal cancer, a big, huge growth right here where angerness and bitterness sits in your body. You know that feeling? When you get anxious or angry or whatever. She actually had this massive tumor that grew. And the doctors told her that it was terminal and there was nothing they could do. And she had a couple friends who were pastors who came and visited her and one of the pastors was coming in and was telling her, like, you need to accept Jesus or you're going to hell, blah, 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 blah. You know, kind of the thing that a lot of us have heard. And she was furious and she threw them out of her hospital room. And they were like, you have a week or less to live. And she was just angry. And then the way she tells it, another pastor friend came back the next day and she didn't let him in the room. And then he came back the day after that. And his message was slightly different. It was that God sees you and loves you and always has. Even if it didn't feel like it, even if you didn't know it in your body, in your experience, God has always seen you and loved you. And that's something you need to receive. You need to know it, receive it literally in your body, that God has received and loved you. And that Paquita heard. And it totally transformed. She was healed of the cancer. Now, my specifics are not as dramatic and physiological as that, but I believe, again, the truth is amazing. So rather than dying as a late 20-year-old, she lived to be well into her late 80s and she exuded the transformative love of God. Everywhere she went, she made converts, if you will, to the love of God, of inviting and receiving that Christ. So again, I see that she lived in sort of as a type for Jesus, who is a type for the love of God for us to know, that benevolent face in the universe. Paquita became a transformative, benevolent face of God to me. She, in a place where I was in another world and everything was unfamiliar and I had no idea what to do, she showed me a way. And the way she showed me was love. And she showed me how powerful that is. And if you're standing with all the people I said behind me, and you know that love transforms anything, it's powerful. It's amazing. It's awesome. So I think this is one of the things that I want to encourage us to keep coming back to as we hear each other's stories this week. It is that we're paying attention to different things. You probably wouldn't be thinking as deeply about some of these things if you're at your workplace or whatever the normal rhythm is that you do. But please be encountering the love of God here. There are, how many campers are there? 121. So there are 121 benevolent face of God representations here. There are so many opportunities to find and encounter the living love of God. And guess what? Back to the law of three. When you are here in this time and there's transformative love present, something will be born, something will change. I want to come back to that just for a second, that thing that felt really abstract. One of the concepts that I've been sort of trying to chew on and swallow is this idea. I think that in the most of the Christianities that we grew up with, there's this idea of I, thou, which is a beautiful relationship, this idea that like God as a lover, God loves me and knows me, sees me. And that is beautiful, but probably doesn't quite get as deeply as, I think the next step from there is I. I love it. I saw some eyes go. And there's a few things wrapped up in that, so maybe you can chew on that and see what you come up with. But some of the things that speaks to me is that when I look at Dan, I do see an I and a thou. And then I look again and I look deeper and I see an I and I. I see the Spirit of Christ that lives in you. It's in me too. And though we are prisms that refract and reflect that differently and are intended to, that there's a deep knowing, a deep connection, a deep same Christ working in us. Another way that sometimes it's said in some of these wiser than me people who are reading, who I've been reading and sitting with, are, well, it's something like this. So, two persons is a beautiful opportunity to express love. But its culmination is, I'm not trying to be explicit here, but its culmination is erotic. And that's fine, and that's great, and that's beautiful. That's actually a wonderful gift. But the problem is if they're only in isolation, they tend to become codependent, and they need a breath. Agape love, coming back to the three stands, the law of three, the creative love, the law of creation, agape love requires a third. So let's consider the husband and wife relationship for a second. The relationship directly between them is beautiful, is to be cultivated, is to be nurtured. But there's something different that happens when there's a third. So let's consider the mom, dad, and a child. What happens just between my wife and I is, I'm making people nervous here. I'm not trying to make you too nervous. I'm just saying it's a beautiful, wonderful thing that lives in memory and in our relationship, and that's as far as it really kind of goes. But if it's going to be agape love, it requires a third. It's going to embody a new creation of some sort. It might be a child who is living and is not just a product of us, but is actually, if you've been a parent, you know that having a child is introducing a third independent will, right? An independent person. They are not just an automatic download of whatever the mom and dad decide to download into them. It is an independent third force that has been introduced to your family. And that's the beauty of it. That's what it's supposed to be. That child is not supposed to be a little McAllen Chris robot. That would be horrible and terrifying. That child is supposed to be an Ailey or an Amaya or a Charles or a Maggie or whoever you are, whoever I am as a product of our parents. So there's a third something that lives on and has its own life. And even if you're a couple that doesn't have a child, that can take a lot of forms. Maybe it's the way that you serve the community. The invitation beyond your home, beyond that relationship into a third thing, into something bigger, an expression of the love that you have between each other. That's what agape is. It requires some service together. Does that make sense? So the agape cannot be perfectly expressed between two is the idea, but it requires a third. Eros can be, and it's beautiful, but if we're talking about Jesus and the Trinity as agape love, it requires a third. So the interesting thing, you could go there if you want to a little bit. I'm not going to go there. I don't want to get too heady. But I do want you to chew on it and think on it, and then tell me what you learned so I can learn it. So now I'm going to fast forward through a whole bunch of things to this idea that one of the other big things I've been wrestling with is this idea. We sing a song, Christy, that I love the bridge of, and it's like, even in the, dun, 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 you're with me. Let's see. In light in the darkness. Light in the darkness. My God. Yeah. Yeah, Waymaker. And the bridge, I'm thinking of it. And this phrase, it says light in the darkness. That's true, but I also am living and want to share with you just one piece as we close today, and that this will be part of my personal story. I'm going to fast forward through a lot. Sometimes when I'm singing that, I want to sing light and the darkness instead of light in the darkness. Because I think one of the things I've been contemplating, even since I was a child, was this weird idea that we're supposed to, the way we talk about darkness sometimes feels like you're supposed to be afraid of it. And it's going to get you, and it's where all the bad things live. But guess what? God made light and darkness, day and night, and said that it was good. That I just want to invite you to know that God also inhabits the darkness. That God's presence is in the darkness, and the darkness has a place. And I don't mean to say that God wants us all to be traumatized, okay? Please don't hear me saying that. But I'm saying that darkness is also beautiful. They're not opposites. In the kingdom of God, everything belongs, okay? And so what I'm trying to say is that darkness is a beauty we have to know and engage. It is rest. It is where all the healing and growth happens. It is where strength is. And if we miss that, we're missing a full, at least 50% of what God created us to know and to participate in. So, any of you, I'm going to share my origin story in 3 minutes. I can do it, Cameron. He's like holding his breath because he knows I'm like short on time and I had like 1,000 more things I meant to say. And these are the big ones. Okay, so any of you you've all seen superhero stories in the origin story? Any of you as children imagine your origin story? You see a spider and you think, this is the moment where I'm going to get bit and become Spider-Man. I sort of had a moment like that where I had my origin story in the next phase of my journey in life with Christ. Happened a couple of years ago, 3 years ago this summer, almost to the day. Well, this time, I had something that looked a lot like, you've seen the sequences where Spider-Man gets bit and then he's like all these things are happening, changes are happening to my body, all this sort of stuff, right? I kind of lived that spring. For several months, things that were growing came to a head, and I had all these weird symptoms. I was dizzy. There were times where I was like, I couldn't see, like where I literally tried to stumble to my office, close the door, and lay on the floor in my office. And I was like, something is not right. I don't know what it is, but things were not healing that had been injuries that should have healed. I had all kinds of weird stuff going on. And so then I got 6 months later, I got some clues back from a doctor who was trying to help me. Wasn't the best help, but I found much better help since then. And found out I was diagnosed with polycythemia vera. Everyone say that 10 times fast. Nice try, but you all failed at it. Polycythemia vera means that my body never stops making blood, that the JAK2 gene that's supposed to turn things on and off doesn't ever shut it off. So by the time we found it, I had about 3.2 times the normal amount of blood that an adult has in their body. So everything was not working like it's supposed to, feeling super slow. And so the primary thing that they do at that point is phlebotomies. So I found my new superpower. I'm like, yes! All they have to do is just take like a pint of my blood. At the beginning, it was 3 times a week, and then it was like less and less often, so to keep things normal. So I can supply blood to the world. This is my superpower. And when I do, I feel good. Like I leave that place and I'm like, yeah. A lot of other people are there. They're like, you want a cookie? You want some juice? You want to sit for a while? And I'm like, I'll take the cookie and juice, but I'm out. I'm dancing my way out of here, and it felt better every time I left. It was like amazing. It was like, I have a brain. I can think again. Like my body does things that it forgot how to do, like things that were significant. Then it didn't quite work out like a superhero story. And that they can't use that blood, so they just burn it. So that's a little bit of a bummer. Just because they don't know what it came from or why. They just don't know enough information. I know, I see. Thank you. It is disappointing. I was like, okay, well, this is going to be used for something real great for a lot of people. And it's like, no, it's going to be burned in the incinerator, so whatever. That was the progression for a while. I went back for my regular checkup in May and had basically controlled it by using that and taking some aspirin to keep my blood thin. So the big concern with PV is it's a blood cancer in that your body doesn't stop producing it, but it's not like a tumor or something like other cancers. I went back and hemoglobin's good, hematocrit's good, they're controlled, she feels good about all those things. Looks at a full blood panel and is like, actually though, she's got this look on her, Dr. Matthews has this look on her face. I'm like, not good. What's going on? Like the things that I knew to look at were looking fine. And she's like, oh, your platelets are 980,000. And I was like, do you know that? So you guys know what that meant. I was like, cool, I guess. I mean, I don't know what that means exactly, except that the look on your face says it's not good. And the way she tried to like kind of ground me and bring me into reality is she's like, 1 million is fatal. And so I was like, oh, that does not sound good. I don't want to be fatal. Which, by the way, I've actually gone over 1 million twice since that checkup in early May. And I'm not dead, I'm here. But she was saying that it is a real serious concern. Like, you got to take it seriously because the problem is heart attack, stroke, your blood clotting, and organ failure or whatever. So I walked out of that. Sorry. Darn it, I was going to try to make this fast. I'm getting there. But because there's this is just the process, right? You're in midpoint here, but there's like a point that I want to get back to, the ground and the abyss. One of the things that has been grounding me is understanding God is both ground and abyss. God is light and darkness. God is both things, and we need both things because we need the abyss to understand that's the mystery. God is mystery, and that's what keeps us seeking and keeps us moving. We also need the ground because it's the thing we can stand on. And the paradoxical way that God works is God fills the abyss and shakes the ground. He's in it all. And it's awesome. So I came out and I called Cameron because it was just, I needed somebody with the voice to like hear it from a different perspective at the time. And I was like kind of upset. I was kind of saying things like, hey, doesn't seem real cool because like I've worked with a lot of youth over the years whose dads have left. I want to be a dad who's there. I want to be there for my wife and children. It doesn't seem super cool, God, that I might not have a say in that. Along with other things. After I got done doing this for about 40 minutes, Cameron was speaking back. He's like, we've been talking a lot about God is ground and abyss and how so much of God is mystery. It's so weird because this seems so mysterious. Like, because I literally feel good. Guys, I run tens of miles every week. I do gymnastics, I practice, I coach. I feel good, except my platelets want to be mean to me. I don't feel bad. But it was the reality that any day could be the day if something doesn't change. And Cameron just said, like, this is, like, we talk about God being mystery and as well as all this, and this is so mysterious, it doesn't make sense. And I just felt overwhelming peace. As soon as I got done, I said, that's right. What I hear you saying is, this too is God. God is filling my abyss. And he's shaking my ground, and it goes in cycles. And I'll come back to a place of grounding, and he shakes it to keep me moving, to keep me searching, because he's like, this is not it. This is not the final resting place. This is not the final download of who I am. Keep seeking, keep moving out. And then there's the back into the abyss and the mystery. But guess what, guys? God fills the abyss too. The mystery is not coming to eat you. Mystery is coming to reveal itself to you. And the form is the benevolent face of Jesus. It's the transforming agent of love as an engine of change. So I want to just sit in prayer for just 1 second, and then we'll head out to rhythms. But that's what I want you to know and be encouraged today. I feel overwhelming gratitude in life and love because I know that this is all God. And he's so good. And I look and feel like I do having 3 days into my chemo. I started chemo right before I came up. Cool. It's not a super intense chemo. It's a more benign form. I'm just saying, like, all the things that we think have ugly monster faces, why don't we just, instead of judging them and putting those into those categories, let's sit with them for a while and see where God is in them and what the beauty is of that. So, loving Spirit of God, Christ who incarnates this whole world and incarnates each one of us, we thank you. I deeply thank you today that I get to stand here with all of the people behind me and all the people in front of me, and that we're all here to proclaim the goodness of the love of God, to look at some different things this week. I really don't mean to be sharing a sad story today, but the Paquita story. That you are always Lazarus calling forth life. And that in the mystery, in the abyss, you are filling it. So wherever we are, if we're on ground that begins to feel today like it's shaking, you are there. And when that ground gives way into abyss, you are there. And we need both. We need the mystery of always digging deeper into you, to knowing you, to joining a long line of Christian mystics who are ready to encounter you, to believe that you're not just a set of ideas that we're affirming this week, things that we agree upon, but rather a changing force of love. And we invite you, Jesus, to do that again today. As we go out and as we play and as we move, that you are this. In Jesus' name. In the names of all the beautiful names of God. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Chris. You have once again challenged us to consider a fresh perspective on what God is doing in our lives. We thank God for his hand on your life and the deep truths he has revealed to you in your journey. Thank you for sharing these deeply personal experiences with us. May we learn to embrace the darkness with the light, the hard parts of life with the easy times, realizing we're not traveling alone. There are people behind us, next to us, and before us. All of us are on this journey together.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Lamplight, a podcast from CFO North America. It is our mission to lead people in the adventurous pursuit of a transformed life in Jesus. If you know someone who might enjoy today's episode, please share it with them. And if you'd like to learn more about CFO North America, please visit our website, cfonorthamerica.org.